When I was about 7 years old, I was at a friend's birthday party. We went to the local cinema with a group of 6 other kids, my friend and her mother. I had to go to the bathroom during the movie, and I told her mum, assuming that she'd come with me, because even then I knew going places alone as a child could be dangerous. But she didn't go with me. I went out to the bathroom alone. I must also mention that this was a small local cinema, which was really old and most of the time was empty. Not like regular theatres that nowadays always have some people bustling about. Anyway, on the way to the bathroom, I saw some guy leaning against the sweets or popcorn counter, seemingly with nothing to do. I thought maybe he was just waiting for his kid to come out of the bathroom or something. At this place, the bathroom was one small room that was separated into 2 stalls for men and 2 stalls for women. The guy came in about a minute after me. I could see his shadow under the door of the stall I was in. He was walking back and forth outside it. He shouldn't have been over on the women's side. No one else was in the bathroom with us, so I started panicking. I stayed in there for a couple of minutes because I was too scared to go out. He eventually left, so I decided to go back. When I walked out of the bathroom, he was standing there, blocking the doorway, standing with his arms and legs spread out like he was ready to grab me and scoop me up. My heart started racing. He was more than twice my size, and I was terrified. I thought fast enough to jump through the gap between his legs. I skidded on the carpet and burned my knees, but I got up as fast as I could and ran back to the screen the party was at. I wish it ended here. That night at home, I remember hiding this baby doll I had, because I thought that the guy was going to come for me, and I wanted to protect her. My mum noticed me acting weird and asked what was wrong. I blurted out that a man tried to grab me when I was at the cinema. She kind of brushed it off, but I think she was trying to act like nothing was wrong for my sake, though I saw in her eyes that she was worried. Later, I heard her and my dad talking, and she came to ask me what the guy looked like. She asked, "Did he have a black mustache?" He did. "Did he have messy hair?" He did. But how did she know these things? Turns out, he was at our fucking house earlier that day, replacing a window, and must have heard my mum and me talking about the party. I don't know what he was planning on doing if he grabbed me. Maybe kidnapping me? Maybe something worse. I'm just glad he didn't. I'm a 25-year-old female, and this took place about 2 days ago. My friend, who I'll call Billy, and I were just getting off work when he asked me to go over to his place. I said I would because he was attractive and I didn't want to spend the night alone. While at his place, we were wondering what we should do, and he suggested to get on the Tor browser. At this point in time, I had no idea what it was, and he explained it to me. I was a bit hesitant, but finally agreed because he told me that I could get some weed for really cheap. He had done it a few times before and had it delivered to his house through apps. As he showed me how to access the Tor browser, we started to go through random websites until we finally found a site that he had ordered from before. I was honestly surprised at the selection of weed that the site had to offer. I found a strand that I thought was great quality for a cheap price. He used my debit card and entered my card information. When it came to the part where he had said it needed an address, he actually put his real address. I asked him, isn't he scared the cops will get involved? And he assured me that the senders go through great measures to make it go undetected through the mail, and usually put it in a DVD box or something like that when they send it. And it did ease my mind a bit. Billy then hit submit and told me that he would be here in 3 to 5 days. We then put on a movie and ordered pizza. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Billy went to answer the door with the money in his hand to pay for the pizza. He opened the door and the pizza guy gave him the pizza. Billy gave him the money. Billy closed the door and came to sit down with me, but by the time he sat down, there was another knock on the door. Billy thought that the pizza guy had forgotten something, so he answered the door without hesitation. As the door opened, Billy saw 2 guys dressed in really nice business suits, and they made their way into the house and closed the door behind them. Billy asked them who they were, and they said that they were here to deliver a package he had ordered online. I was freaking out at this point, but tried to stay calm due to the situation. Billy just stood there to see what they were going to do. The two guys had a briefcase with them and opened it. One of the guys pulled a black bag out of the briefcase and placed it on the counter. They then said thanks for the business, and they both left out the door. 5 minutes had passed, and Billy and I were still standing there in complete silence, just staring at the bag, still in shock at what had just happened. Billy picked up the bag, and I told him that maybe we should call the cops and let them know about the situation, but he eventually talked me out of it. As he opened the bag and dumped out the contents, the bag of weed that we ordered fell out, along with a piece of paper that had all my information, from where I lived, the car I drove, the schools I attended. Everything about my life was on that paper. At the bottom of the paper, it said that I should be expecting a visit from them very soon to start a new life, when someone places an order. I am currently staying at Billy's house and have been missing work, and I am not leaving his place or site until I determine what I should do. I'm freaking out right now, and don't know if I should go to the police or move to a new state or something. Advice is much needed right now. Thanks. In 1985, my family moved to the Pacific Northwest. My father was in the military and was stationed in Washington State. He would serve on a ship bound for Alaskan waters for 2 years. My mother, sister and I settled in a small town about 45 minutes outside of Seattle. Our new house was built in a brand new neighborhood smack in the middle of a large pine forest. Having lived on the East Coast, the Pacific Northwest was a huge adventure. I had just turned 13 and was in 7th grade. I quickly made friends and eventually became inseparable from my 3 best friends, Dan, Jake and Ryan. The woods around the neighborhood became our playground. Hiking, camping, fishing was all we did that first summer. We all had got paper routes delivering the Seattle Times in our new neighborhood. The papers were delivered daily to a small wooden shack at the edge of the neighborhood on a small gravel road. We would go early in the morning while it was still dark. We would load the papers in our satchels, jump on our bikes, and off we'd go. The shack was at the edge of a large forest that was a nature preserve. It was about a mile outside of the neighborhood, and often was a creepy ride in the dark of the morning. We would always arrive around 5:30 a.m. We all lived in different parts of the neighborhood, so usually we rode there by ourselves. The woods were teeming with coyote, and their mournful cry in the dark of the morning would definitely put you on edge. They were pretty harmless, except for some of the domestic pets that were being eaten by them. While there were several hiking trails and campsites that we frequented, the woods next to the shack were a bit of a mystery. They had an ominous vibe, but we were curious and decided that we would go exploring. We decided one Saturday after delivering that we would have lunch and hike into the woods and possibly camp overnight. We told our parents that we were spending the night at Ryan's, whose house was closest to the edge of the forest. We packed our camping gear, strapped on our survival knives, grabbed our slingshots, flashlights, and headed out around 1:30. We did do a little prep. We had a map of the preserve. It was an older map, and our neighborhood wasn't even on it, but the gravel road that our paper shack was on the map. It looked like it had several fire trails that crossed the preserve. The preserve was not huge, but still quite large, about 8 miles west, till you hit a major road and bordered by a large river to the north, and the main town to the south. We set off in high spirits, joking around, kings of the woods. I often equate it to the movie Stand By Me. We were all roughly the same age, and the landscape was almost identical to that movie. We planned to head in as deep as we dared and find a good spot to camp. We explored along the way. The forest was dense with ferns and moss. The soil was loamy and swampy in parts, but we moved easily through the undergrowth. We explored some rocked out crops and large down trees. We took some shots from our slingshots at various targets. After 2 hours of leisurely hiking, I would say that we had covered a couple of miles. We came to the top of a stream valley that dropped several hundred feet to a stream below, then rose steeply on the other side. We decided we would hike down the slope, cross the stream and up the other side. At that point, we would decide whether to set up camp or head back. After 20 minutes, we managed to scramble almost up to the other side. As we neared the top, we noticed a huge downpipe several feet in diameter. It was about 4 feet off the ground. Dan, who was the biggest, was the first to jump on it. Guys, he said, you need to see this. As we all jumped onto the log, it took me a second to process what I was looking at. We had stumbled into a large circular clearing, about 300 feet in diameter. It looked like a fairly new construction, as the cedar siding looked new, and the larger triangular windows looked very modern. I immediately had the feeling of Hansel and Gretel. Something didn't feel right. As we scanned the clearing, we spotted some odd structures. Dan and Jake hopped off of the log into the clearing. Myself and Ryan were hesitant, but followed. As we slowly moved left, we saw what looked like to be a large fire pit surrounded by several large rocks and logs. At first glance, it looked to be a campfire site, but we quickly saw something that made us take pause. A large tree stump that was charred was facing the stone and log benches. We slowly circled around to the front of the stump, and we saw what looked like a totem pole face. The face was carved out of the stump in a demonic-looking grimace. The mouth, nose, and eyes were heavily charred. We crept closer and noticed that the hollow stump was filled with bones. Next to the stump was a large stone that had feathers and fur strewn about its base, and rust-colored stains ran down the side of the stone. We all looked at each other, eyes wide. "This was some sort of animal sacrifice. We've got to get out of here," said Ryan. We were all thinking the same thing, but something else caught our eye. Towards the edge of the clearing were 7 large mounds of dirt. We decided to quickly check it out and make a hasty retreat. When we got closer to the mounds, we realized that it was the dirt left from digging holes. 7 perfect rectangular holes, 6 foot, 4 foot. "Oh shit. Oh shit. There's fucking bodies in there." I was right behind Dan when he said this. I got a glance. Pale skin, yellow hair. Everyone was already backpedaling towards the woods. Wait, I said. A flood of relief came over me. Mannequins. They're mannequins. The guy slowly crept back, and sure enough, all 7 graves each had a mannequin in it. Blonde, brunette, redhead. Some were undressed, and some had dresses on. Whatever this place was, it was messed up. It was time to leave, but by this point, we were fairly close to the cabin. There was a small wraparound deck in the front of the cabin with a large picture window. We decided we had to get a look. Something sinister was going on. We had to tell the authorities. As we tiptoed towards the cabin, we noticed a small gravel road entering on the opposite sides of the clearing. There was vehicle access there. The 4 of us slowly ascended the deck and peered into the window. It basically looked like a large kitchen. One side of the wall was cabinets, a sink and 2 ovens. In the middle of the floor was a large metallic table. It looked like a lab table with a drain in the center. On the opposite wall was a ladder leading up to what looked like a loft. I could make out some mattresses. A single door led to what looked like a bathroom. We all had our hands cupped to the window to look inside, and just then, alarm bells went off in my head. A feeling of overwhelming dread washed over me. I backed away from the window, and to my absolute horror, I saw a reflection in the window. 3 hooded figures stood on the gravel road at the entrance of the clearing. Jake spun around, his eyes going wide as saucers, blood running out of his face. At this point, all 4 of us had turned. 3 robed and hooded figures stood about 75 feet away from us. Their heads were tilted forward, and under the large hoods, we couldn't make out any facial features. The first figure raised his head slightly, and I could make out what looked like a beak. He had some sort of animal mask on. The flight or fight survival instinct was in full swing now. Adrenaline flooded my body. Dan, who was the most mature of us, must have had the same thought because in a loud baritone voice, he bellowed, "We're armed!" What the hell was he thinking? We all had large hunting knives on our belts and slingshots with large ball bearings, but who knew what the hell they had under those robes? 4 of us, 3 of them. I was not going to end up in that messed up sacrificial totem or grave. A million thoughts were running through my head. Ryan, to my right, was full on shaking, teeth chattering. He let out a whimper. The 3 figures didn't say a word. They just slowly took 3 steps towards us. All the bravado and bluster was gone. We took off like a frightened herd of deer. We leapt off the deck in full sprint towards the huge log at the east of the clearing. As we cleared the back of the cabin, I noticed towards our left 2 more hooded figures had emerged from the woods and were running to cut us off. We were in full survival mode now, running for our lives. As we closed in on the log, we all saw it at the same time. 3 more figures rounding the sacrifice totem in a dead run. Their long robes gave them the appearance of gliding across the clearing. It was absolutely terrifying. Dan was the first to the log. He took a mighty leap right on top and over the other side. I was close on his heels. Adrenaline can make you do some amazing things. I was able, to my surprise, to make it on top in one jump. I leapt down. Dan was already 20 feet ahead of me down the slope. Just as I turned my head, I heard a sickening thud. Ryan, the third over the log, had tripped and fallen over. To my amazement and relief, he rolled right back to his feet and strutted past me like I was standing still. Jake had still not crested the log. He was the smallest, but he was still pretty quick. By this point, Dan and Ryan were halfway down the slope. Jake had still not appeared, and we couldn't leave him, but I couldn't go back either. But just then, Jake came crashing through the brush just ahead of me. He must have cut behind them as they were converging on us. At this point, I was in the back, and as I looked back, I'll never forget what I saw. The image is forever burned in my memory and nightmares. 8 hooded figures, all standing at the log. I could only see them from the shoulders up, but their faces were all visible. Hideous animal masks, all of them. They looked like some sort of sadistic evil. They didn't pursue us past the log. They never spoke, never said a word. What had been a 2-hour leisurely hike had become a 25-30 minute sprint. We never let up for 1 minute. Our lungs were burning, muscles screaming. We finally cleared the forest and collapsed in a heap at the paper shed. We were all trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a dream. We immediately headed to Ryan's house and told his parents. His parents called the police. The police interviewed us and asked everything we remembered. Several days later, an officer had come to my house to talk to my mother and I. They had found the cabin. It was private property, and we had been trespassing. The owners would not press charges as long as we didn't return. They apparently found some odd things, but nothing illegal. I asked what about the animal sacrifices, the bones and the feathers. The officer told us that it could have been the remnants of cleaning animals after a hunt. I blurted out, "But what about the graves and the mannequins?" The officer sternly said that it's being looked into. Needless to say, the word spread around the neighborhood and everyone kept clear of that preserve. Years later, I remember talking to my mother about that terrifying incident. Turns out the police had talked to some of the parents privately. The town next to us had several ongoing investigations regarding satanic cults and similar groups. Several people, including children, had gone missing from surrounding towns. To this day, 30 years later, I shudder at the thought of what would have happened to us if we had been caught. I have always been fascinated with the paranormal. In fact, my aunt just commented on Christmas, and when I was younger, I would run up to her, asking her to tell me scary stories. I suppose I liked the rush of being freaked out. Needless to say, the Ouija board was a predominant factor in my early years. My friends and I would turn off all the lights in the bathroom and attempt to contact spirits. I can't even count how many times we messed with the board at sleepovers and such. There were 2 times that really stuck with me. I'll go into them now. One night, when I was about 10, I was staying at my friend's house and we decided to pull out the Ouija board. We started talking to a small girl our age who called herself Lucy. Normally, we would hit a dead end with the board and it would start spelling out gibberish. But Lucy was different. I know many people think the Ouija board is a mind game and it's all based on the players moving their hands, but I was a believer back then, and to this day, that's what I'll remain. We talked to Lucy for quite a while and began to feel very comfortable talking to her. She had a calming presence and was very engaging. We would ask her questions only we knew, and she would answer correctly almost every time. My friend grew skeptical that I was moving the board, however, so we asked Lucy to prove that she was real. We looked around the room. "Make her turn the lights off?" my friend Amy said. We both looked at each other and shook our heads. We were comfortable talking to Lucy, but not comfortable enough being in the pitch black with her. "Make the door open?" Amy said. We both agreed this would validate her presence. I jumped up and shut the door, locking it to make it a little more difficult. We asked Lucy if she was ready, and she replied with yes. We sat on the bed and stared at the door handle. 10 seconds passed by, then 20, then 30, then a minute, and nothing. We looked at each other and decided that maybe locking the door proved too difficult for her to open. Amy got up to unlock the door when suddenly, the door handle had unlocked. We froze. I looked at Amy, who had now stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the handle. The handle very slowly turned, and the door crept open ever so slightly. Our eyes widened. Amy sprinted back to the bed, and we shot underneath the sheets. Amy peeked out from the sheets. "Mum?" Silence. We looked at each other, and a sense of sheer excitement swept over us. "She's real," we whispered. We swiftly got back on the board and thanked Lucy for proving us that she was there. We talked more after that, but eventually ran out of things to say. We said goodbye to Lucy, who didn't seem very pleased that we were leaving. I had always remembered a rule I had heard about the Ouija board, to always make sure that the spirit says goodbye back to you, and I made sure that we all said our goodbyes willingly. Fast forward about 12 years later. I was 22 years old and in college. My roommates and I were all moving out of the apartment, and I pulled the Ouija board out of the closet, forgetting that I had brought it with me. My childhood best friend lived with me at the time, and had always gotten a strange feeling in her room, so we decided to attempt to make contact inside of her room. We drew the blinds and hopped onto her bed, asking for the spirit that was in her room. We chanted and waited a few seconds. "Is anyone there?" I asked. A planchette shot around the board. It spelt out hello. Emily and I looked at each other and grinned. "What is your name?" we asked. The planchette quickly darted around the board. Emily and I glanced at each other, a little skeptical one of us was behind the quick movement. It spelt out, "Don't you remember me?" We looked at each other confused. We had both played the board numerous times when we were younger and had contacted quite a few spirits. "What is your name?" we asked again. Silence. "Do you live in this room?" Emily asked. Silence. "Maybe we should say goodbye," I suggested. The planchette shot to the corner. No. We were a little freaked out at this point, but continued to press on the identity. "Who are you?" I asked. The planchette started moving around in circles, quickly, then slowly. Emily smiled. "Are you trying to play games with us?" she asked playfully. The planchette moved slowly to the corner. No. We both looked at each other. The hairs were standing on the back of my neck. I was pretty done at this point. "Listen, we are not going to talk to you anymore. You're not answering our questions. We're going to leave, alright?" The planchette shot around again. It spelt out, "Talk to me." "No," I said sternly. The planchette moved around some more. It spelt out, "It's Lucy." At this point, I was not sure if I believed what the spirit was telling me. And to be quite honest, I didn't really care. I had remembered who Lucy was, and I just got a strange feeling from this encounter, and I did not like talking with whatever was on the other side of the messages. "Hi Lucy," I said. "We are going to leave now, okay? We need you to say goodbye." Silence. "Let's just move it to goodbye," I said. As soon as we motioned it to goodbye, the planchette started shooting around again. I can't explain it, but whatever was contacting us was aggressive and was scaring the shit out of us. We were 22 years old and had not played this game in years, but something about this did not feel right. It spelt out, "You left me." "I'm sorry, but now we're going to go," I said. Silence. The planchette started moving faster than I had ever seen it move. It spelt out over and over again, "No friend, no friend, no friend." "Say goodbye, Lucy," I said sternly, and suddenly the planchette stopped moving. I looked at Emily, who at this point had tears welling up in her eyes. I felt a mix of emotions, but in that moment I felt very scared and angry. I made the planchette move to goodbye, and I threw the board off the bed. We both stared at it for a few seconds, complete silence, until... We looked at the door, too scared to move. We stared for a few seconds, but there was nothing but silence. I mustered up the courage to walk to the door to open it, but it was locked. Whatever it was that was in that room with us had locked the door. To this day, I have no idea what we had contacted and if it was really Lucy, or if I had even really been talking to a little girl all those years before. The calming presence I felt at 10 was nothing like what